Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another episode of Climbing the Tactics Training Ladder. Alright, so I'm at 2110 right now. I'm still sporting this 98% pass rate. I hope to keep that up, and let's get right into it with the first problem. Rook takes f4, so I would assume queen takes f4 back with check, but what's the follow-up after that? Because black is down material here, white has a rook against a knight, so queen takes f4, let's assume king g2. I'd love to get at that rook on b1, so maybe bishop e4 is the move. Bishop takes e4, queen takes e4 check, forking the king and the rook. Otherwise, I do believe white is on the verge of getting mated. Yes, I think they will get mated if they ignore that. So that looks correct to me. Maybe we could include the knight somehow with knight g5, but I would very much like to get that fork in with bishop e4. So queen takes f4, king g2, bishop e4. Yeah, that wins. If king g1, queen e3 is good. Queen g3 rather. Queen e3 is also good. So if queen f4, what if king g1? That's probably the only question mark. I assume queen e3 right there. Actually, that just transposes to the line I mentioned. Okay, so let's go for this, and we'll just see which move white chooses. Okay, so I'm going to do this one. Now we got the fork on the king and the rook. Let's just go pick up that rook. Problem solved. 6 points. Okay, so the first move was very obvious in this one, taking the rook. Not too many other moves you'd consider. I mean, maybe we'd look at bishop takes d3. I didn't really mention that move, but it jumped out at me the fact that this rook on b1 is in the line of fire of that light square bishop on f5. So I was immediately looking at ways to exploit that. And it just so happens that bishop e4 is the way to do it. And if we just click over to the analysis board for a second, if the problem had continued with king to g1, I was prepared to play queen g3 check. And if king f1, I think bishop takes d3 is just going to cost white the queen. Black wins in this case. And there's no other moves, so can't go to h1. And that's the problem with king h1 as well, or king g1 at the start. It's going to be the same issue. Okay, on to the next problem. If you heard some booms in the background, that's because it is July 3rd. Tomorrow's Independence Day here in the US, and a bunch of my neighbors are lighting off fireworks right now. So this is really going to test my concentration. All right, g4. So white is down 3 pawns, but black's king looks like it could be checked around, and knight g5 would fork the king and the rook directly. Is there something better than knight g5? If this were a bullet game and I had mere seconds left, I would definitely play knight g5 with the fork. But what about rook f6 or knight c5? Knight c5, king d6, rook f6 is mate, isn't it? So is this just a simple mate in 2 problem? I think so. And I think the key is just making sure that you don't bite on the first available fork that looks good, or the first available check that looks good. So we had the wrong path with knight g5. Black goes king d7, and this should probably be a draw after this. Rook h8, white is going to pick up the h-pawn, but black is never going to lose this position. Even if they lost the a and the c-pawn, it would still be a draw, king and knight versus king and rook. So just making sure that you consider all your resources and sit on your hands when you find a good move and look for a better move, as the old advice goes, I believe, by Lasker, was it, who had that quote? So sit on your hands, look for a better move. Okay, next problem. Rook c7. We've got a lot of pressure coming down on c6. Bishop b5 is a move I would like to play if it works. So hitting c6 again. And of course, if they take the bishop, then rook takes c7 is going to be lights out. Can I do this in more brutal fashion? Like, can I play rook takes c6, rook takes c6, and then bishop b5? Probably not, because rook takes c1 comes with check. So bishop b5 right away, on the other hand, is looking tasty. Our queen on f6 can't really be harassed. If rook f8, there's queen takes on g6 check. Everything's crashing down for black. So this is the weak point. We're clearly lined up against it. e6 is also kind of weak, but only the queen is attacking. So I do believe bishop b5 is the way to capitalize. And I'm going to go for that. Queen e7. Okay, so just bishop takes c6 or something else. There's also rook takes c6. So bishop takes c6, probably king d8. And maybe black is minimizing their losses. So perhaps rook takes c6, rook takes c6, rook takes c6 is the better way to do this. I'm thinking so. Yeah, let's do that. And again, if bishop takes, king d8, and black lives to fight another day. But with this move, I think we're just winning the house. Now rook takes e6, double check. And then pick up the queen next move. Rook takes f6. Okay, we passed that one, 7 points. So there was this weak point c6. We have the doubled rooks bearing down on that pawn. So naturally, I was looking at ways to enforce the advantage there. And moves that jump out are rook takes c6, bishop b5, maybe pawn b5. But the fact that that rook on c7 is only defended by the black queen, and also the black queen is kind of overloaded, trying to observe both c7 and e6, that made me want to look for a knockout here. And bishop b5 just seems like the way to do it. That's the one piece that in my mind is not participating yet, so it's nice to include that. If we were to play, on the other hand, pawn b5, we give black the chance to lock up the position with c5. The advantage bishop b5 has over that is if c5, we just take the queen on d7. So no defense there for black. And black can't ignore the triple attack on c6. There's no way for them to get another defender. And as I was saying, if rook f8 ever trying to attack the queen, then at the bare minimum, queen takes g6 is going to be quite good for white. Next problem. Okay, knight takes d4. So I see that if we do lose the rook eventually here, there might be a bishop d5 fork move. And by the way, in all these problems, I'm still looking at forcing move. It's just when we get tougher and tougher like this, it's less likely to be a purely forcing continuation. The mate in 2 that you saw with the rook and knight problem was an exception in this problem set. Okay, so how do I make this work move order-wise? Because an issue is that a6 might also fall. Like if I play e takes d4, rook takes e6, bishop d5, then one of the rooks takes on a6 and white is surviving and thriving. What if knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, pawn takes, rook takes, bishop d5, same issue? So how do we navigate that? Maybe we change up the move order. So if knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, then bishop d5, defending the rook on e6, hitting the rook on a2, and preparing e takes d4. I like the look of that. Could they play c4? c4 we actually just take on d4 still. Okay, I'm going with that. Changing up the move order. Always a good thing to do when you're calculating. Yeah, that's exactly how I arrived at this solution. So this idea came to mind involving bishop d5. So just to illustrate that, if we play, let's say pawn takes d4, rook takes e6, there's this fork. These 2 rooks are on the same diagonal as the light square bishop, but white always gets out of it with a rook taking on a6, and if I take the rook that's hanging, they'll take my rook, and white wins. So I couldn't make this idea work, and same thing with knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, pawn takes d4, rook takes e6, bishop d5, fails for the same reason. But what's really key in the mindset shift that a lot of you have to make if you want to get better at tactics, you have to take that piece of information that you just gleaned from those lines that you calculated and try to apply it forward. Don't just immediately discard it and say, okay, this whole line of thinking doesn't work. Because your chess instincts, they're going to guide you. They're going to take you in the right direction. So you got to listen to them and help refine them, refine those conclusions. And by changing up the move order and just playing after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop d5 right away while the e file is still covered, that's the solution right there. The only other line I was looking at, maybe white could try here, because it is a double attack. Rook's hanging and suddenly the bishop's hanging. They could try c4, trying to place our bishop under fire, hoping for like this. But at any point here, black could actually take on d4, and all of a sudden white's rook on e1 is hanging. So black still emerges a piece ahead. Nice problem. I like that one. Okay, next one. This is going to be some knight dance, I bet. Trying to corral the rook, maybe win it. Thing is, we're not really in forking distance, are we? I'm trying to imagine how a fork would play out on the king and the rook. There's no forcing moves right now. I mean, I suppose there's knight takes a7, but that's it. So knight e5 or knight c5 look like logical places to start. Yeah, especially knight c5, right? Because knight c5, the rook cannot go to c7 or d8 due to knight e6 check. So knight c5, the rook must go to f7. And then I bet knight d6 is the idea. So further harassing the rook. That rules out squares like E7, that would fail to knight f5. F8 or f6 fail to either knight e8 or knight e6. F4 fails. What about rook f3? Rook f3 might be the only move there. And then I think king g2. And wow, that's amazing. But the rook is running out of squares. Okay, I'll show you guys what I mean in a second. But I'm pretty sure about this line, so I'm going to go for it. Yeah, knight d6. This is nice. I love it. Yeah, and king g2. So the knights can't attack the rook anymore, but the king helps do the job. And now we get this check-in at the end. And this will be sufficient for white to win, because we preserved the b-pawn in the process. So the problem ended here, but had it gone on, as long as white keeps that b-pawn, they will win. They'll try to bring their king up and stop the d-pawn next. Okay, there are a lot of fork possibilities there, so let's just go through that. I mean, with this problem, this limited amount of material, it pretty much has to be a fork, right? Like, nothing else is going to fit the bill. So I was looking at attacks on the rook. I mentioned that there's no immediate way to check the black king. So I was looking at ways to set up forks in like 2 moves. So make a move, black makes a move in reply, and then we get a fork in. And knight c5 just happens to limit black's options already, because if rook c7 or rook d8, either one, there's knight e6 check, winning the rook. The rook can't go to d6, can't go to e7 or b7. So rook f7 is the only reply. And now we're just charging with this knight, knight d6, getting closer to the rook. More squares are ruled out. So if rook e7, trying to go somewhere safe on the 7th rank, there's knight f5, check. Note that rook c7 still fails to knight e6. If rook f8, there's knight e6. If rook f6, there's knight e8. f5 is covered. If f4, there's knight e6. So by process of elimination, we see that the rook has only g2 as a safe square. And then this lovely king g2 move. Great economy of forces in this one. I really like problems where like every piece is utilized to the maximum. Even the white pawn on b2, right? It has a role. It's the decisive amount of material in the end. And also it takes away the a3 and the c3 squares from the rook. That's beautiful. So I always like problems like that. Yeah, and black's just losing the rook. Nothing to do. So I believe in the problem. It went rook f6 and then check and go take the rook. Okay, nice one. Let's keep pressing on. 2140. Okay, so there's rook d8 check to try to deflect the rook on c8 from guarding the queen. But if we do it right away, rook takes d8, then queen takes c5, they will take on a1. So how do we get the move order right to make the most of this? Rook takes a8 flashes through my head, but then black can insert queen takes f2 check. So rook d8 would be very nice, but is it working? Rook d8 check, rook takes d8, queen takes c5, rook takes a1, king f2. I don't believe that's going to work for white. Black has enough material there, certainly. So queen takes c5 is probably the move. Queen takes c5, yes. And the only thing there, if rook takes c5, then rook takes a8, bishop takes a8, rook d8 mate. So queen takes c5, rook takes a1. But that can't possibly be working. We could just move our queen somewhere to defend the rook at the very least. Or take on c8 is probably the easiest. So yeah, let's do this. Okay, and it's going to choose the line where black ends up getting checkmated. This one was also a move order problem. So if you saw rook d8 right away, a deflection idea, that's probably an indication you've done tactics like this before, because up around the higher rating echelons of these tactics training problems, they try to trick you and present you with common themes, but with little twists on them, so that you might jump at the theme that you know is consistent with this problem type, but it could backfire and you might fail the problem as a result. And here, that temptation is to play the rook to d8 check move right away. Rook d8 check, deflecting the rook from guarding the queen, but then we lose a1 at the end, and that's check as well. So from there, I looked at rook takes a8, but black can respond with queen takes f2 and then take the rook on a8, guarding the 8th rank. So the only other truly forcing move, is queen takes c5, which happens to be the answer. Note that queen takes f7 is illegal because of the king on g1. So queen takes c5. Had black played rook takes a1, I was planning on just queen takes c8, I think is probably simplest. take, and we can't play rook d8 mate, unfortunately, because of the pin, but we can clean up here. White's up a rook for, 3 pawns, but black has almost nothing left in the tank with rook a8 coming. So move order once again. Pay close attention to those. Next problem. Okay, lots of forces around the black king. On the dark squares in particular, black is really weak, right? Because they've got so many pieces committed to the light squares, but they've got this imposing pawn center. So the move I'm looking at right away is bishop takes d4 because that threatens rook h8 checkmate. And I'm trying to anticipate some defenses by black. I mean, f6 is going to drop the knight. That's quickly losing. King f8 is probably the only defensive move. But then I wonder if we can force mate after rook h8, knight takes h8. I feel we should be able to, but I want to make sure. So then bishop g7, let's say, king g8. I think I can even play bishop h6 there, knight g6, queen f6. And how do they stop mate on g7? I don't think it's possible. So bishop takes d4. Nice move if it works. What about rook h8 right away? Is that possible too, or is that too fancy? King takes h8, bishop takes d4 check. King g8. I might be asking too much of my position there. Even that's pretty dangerous for black, but I like bishop takes d4 right away for its clarity. Note that the black queen on a8 is way out of play at the moment, so it's not participating in the defense. Bishop takes d4, king f8, rook h8 check, knight takes h8. Bishop g7 check, king g8, bishop h6 check, knight g6, queen f6, unstoppable, queen g7 mate. I think I'm reading that position right. Okay, let's do it. Give this check. If queen g7, the king is going to escape out that way, so I like this line more. And the problem just stops. Yeah, I don't like that. I think the problem should go on further. So if we were to explore that final position, king g8, what I had in mind was bishop h6 check, taking away the f8 square so the black king can't run there. And if king h7, there's queen g7 mate. So knight g6 is forced, and then the quiet move, queen f6. And as I said in the beginning, black has so many pieces committed to the light squares. Only one piece, pawn, on b6. When that's the case, your opponent has everything on one color complex. Look to the other color complex because chances are that's going to be weak. You can probably exploit that. And vice versa, if you have all your pieces on one color complex, be very wary of attacks on the opposite color because they can happen in a flash and you won't be able to defend. So this problem should have continued for a couple more moves. I think after bishop takes d4, there's not really another defense because rook h8 mate is the main threat. The knight would be pinned, so black has to run. I mean, there's f6, but queen takes g6 will just clean up. Even queen takes f6 is probably just winning there. Okay, next one. This problem looks familiar. I think I've done this one before. There's something about the arrangement. Okay, so, looking at checks, there's queen e5, there's knight takes f5. Queen e5, queen f6, I suppose, offering to trade queens. And if we pursue that line, queen takes f6, king takes f6, knight d5 check, king f7. Not seeing it leading anywhere. This knight is way out of play over here on a6. And if we do a pawn head count, white is down a pawn right now, so that's important to bear in mind too. d7, this pawn is on the 6th rank, so I'd like to push it. d7 runs into rook takes e7. And I don't see a great follow-up there. We could try queen e5 check, queen f6, and then d7. Because rook takes e7 is met by queen takes e7. But is that enough? I'm not sure about that because of rook f8. Just slide the rook one square over when it's attacked. I suppose then we can trade queens and play knight c6. Okay, so maybe the knight c6 move is playing into this. There's also the matter to consider if queen e5 check, what happens if king h6? I haven't refuted that move necessarily. D7, rook f8. Looks really good. Probably knight c6 there, but then rook takes d7. Could be good. So I'm liking queen e5. Queen e5 first, followed by d7. I'm liking that. Just looking for some more clear continuation. Knight c6 is another move, hitting the rook on d8. Knight takes f5. Don't see it working after queen takes f5. Attacking our queen. Any way we could attack that undefended knight or make that a part of the combination? Not that I'm seeing. I mean, queen f1 seems too extravagant. Knight b4 probably in that case. So queen e5, and then if queen f6, I was saying d7, followed by trading and then knight c6. I think I'm satisfied with that line. So if queen e5, king h6, maybe I just lift a rook then. Probably rook d3, trying to head over to h3. Black's king is precarious over on h6, so they probably will not be able to survive. Okay, let's do that line. I'm liking this. Yeah, and now d7. Problem solved. Okay, somehow I was a little nervous about that one. But yeah, only a two-move solution. We only get 2 points, but we're more concerned with solving the problem right, so I'll take it. Okay, so just to elaborate on some of those lines, after d7, if the rook moves away, the attack rook moves to, say, f8, then the plan was... okay, this is an important point. I think I would have noticed this had we got here, but if I take on f6 right away here, black can actually take with a rook and then guard the c6 square, so I don't have this. Maybe I do actually even have this coming down and attacking the rook. But then they have the very nice move rook c8, rook c to c8. Point being that if we queen, then rook takes d1 is a nasty surprise, and white is just getting back rank mated. So the adjustment I probably would have made is to play knight c6 right here after rook f8 and not trade queens first, because this queen is pinned. It cannot take on c6. Black would be in check then, so that's illegal. And this should win because, yeah, now we're threatening knight takes d8. Black's just going to lose the exchange, and the pawn on d7 survives. So that's one line. Also, if they take on e5, crossed my mind that maybe we can take here and knight the pawn, but I think it's probably just simpler to do this, unless there's a big problem with this. In the case of king here, then I would consider playing d takes e8 and get a knight with check. That's probably good in that case. So do this. Force black to take us back, because if they take e5, then we take on d8. We're up a ton of material. And the other line after queen e5 was king h6. But once I saw that we could lift a rook up to the third rank, trying to get it over to h3, I stopped calculating because black is pretty helpless here. They have no great offensive moves, and they can't stop rook h3. Okay, let's do a couple more problems before we wrap up this session. Rook c2. So this b pawn is pretty fast. b6. And then they could always throw in a check, but I don't think that will greatly affect the position. So b6, they're going to have to bring the rook back to c8. And then I'm thinking bishop e5 is the way to go. Trying to guard the b8 square so we can threaten b7. That should just win, unless I'm mistaken. Yeah, I don't see that defending for black. So b6, let's say rook c1 check, king h2. Can they go behind? Rook b1. We have bishop c5 in that case. Yeah, rook d1, b7, rook d8, bishop a7, or bishop d6. That's winning. Passed pawns must be pushed. Let's do it. I'm very confident about that move. And don't want to play b7 due to rook b8, but I think this adjustment, just controlling the queening square, is sufficient. 5 points on that one, surprisingly. You know, I gotta say, I haven't noticed a big difference in the strength of the problems over the past couple hundred points. I mean, I'm sure the problems are getting harder, but none of these have seriously tasked me yet in the last couple of videos. Whereas in the early part of this Climbing the Tactics Training Ladder series, there were a few problems that really stumped me, and I had to sit there for 5-10 minutes in some cases trying to solve them. But I've been lucky not to encounter any of those lately. Let's do 2 more problems. That last one was pretty straightforward, so we'll do 2 more and then call it quits. Okay, so here we can either take this free knight or we can play queen f1. If we take the knight, I assume white's going to start checking us on the back rank. So how scary is that? Let's find out. So queen takes f3, queen b8 check, a8 is covered. So queen b8, king g7, bishop h6 check, king takes h6. Queen f8 is the only check there, right? And then king h5, and I think we're escaping all the checks, right? There's no other good checks for white left. And there's no stalemate possibilities. Just checking for stalemate because their king is in a weird spot on h3. Okay, so I don't see any problem with that. Queen takes h3, queen b8, just checking again. King g7. Yeah, bishop h6 really looks like the only way to keep it going. I would doubt that a move like bishop g5 is going to work. That's not nearly fast enough. We've got too many checks. So bishop h6, king takes h6, queen f8, king h5. And white's play grinds to a halt, I think. There's also this matter of queen f1. I guess the difference is if queen f1, king h4, queen takes h3, then our king can't as easily come up to the 5th rank. Wow, that could actually backfire and black could get checkmated. I'm going to show that line in a second, but I'm pretty confident about this. Let's do queen takes f3. Ooh, and they throw in the bullet move, queen a8. Hoping that we don't notice the hanging queen. Good thing to do when you're in a completely lost position. It's a nasty trick. I actually fell victim to that trick in one of my bullet videos lately against a FIDE master on ICC. It was pretty funny. Okay, so in this one, 2 forcing moves, queen takes f3 and queen f1 check, both tempting. Don't think there's too many other moves we'd even look at here. But I don't know, it's just weighing the value of checking the king or leaving it on h3. And in this case, it turns out that leaving it on h3 is the way to go. So the main threat I was calculating was queen takes f3, queen b8 check, the safe square for the queen. Here, the only good check to keep this going for white before black unleashes a bunch of checks followed by mate, probably. The only good check is bishop h6, but then king takes h6, queen f8, again, only check, and king here. And the only check white has remaining is queen h6, which is obviously going to lose. g4 is not possible. The pawn is pinned, so white loses. Whereas in the other case, if king h3, queen f1, king h4, and then black decides to take, it looks pretty similar at first, but the difference, the king on h4 versus h3, rears its ugly head for black, and bishop h6 would be an unpleasant surprise, to say the least, because after king takes h6, queen f8 is mate. Black is done in by the fact that the white king controls h5 and g5. So 2 main variations in this one, just comparing the position of the black king when we play out that line and white goes for these checks. All right, last problem. Let's make it a good one. Queen h4 mate was the threat, so white just avoids that with their last move. So bishop h4 or queen h4 just seem to win the queen, right? What am I missing here? Okay, if bishop h4, king h2, bishop takes f2. I mean, there's this bishop on b2, but it'd take a lot of effort to convince me that e6 is, well, maybe e6. Maybe e6 is actually working, amazingly. So is queen h4 just safer? Queen h4, king h2, queen takes f2. Then we're threatening bishop to f4 checkmate. So if e6, there's bishop f4 mate. Yeah, I'm leaning towards the queen check on h4, but it's very odd that we're presented with 2 ways to win the queen, and they both look pretty darn safe. I guess there's the check on e8 with the knight at the end too, but that's not going to do us any harm. I feel like I'm missing something, but at the same time, probably not. Maybe there's some quicker way to checkmate. That's sometimes the case. They give you a really tempting option like winning the queen, but there's a checkmate instead. But white just made Luft with their king, h3, providing a safe square to go to. I don't think there's mate. I don't see one anyways. Okay, let's do the queen check. Here there's bishop f4, but that would run into g3, so let's go ahead and take this guy. Odd problem, that last one. Only 1 point there. Yet this has a 58% pass rate, so I bet that there are quite a few people who play, if we go to the analysis board, bishop h4 check instead. I mean, what would be the problem with this, though, really? Here, take. I guess material-wise, I didn't count up all the material because I just assumed black was way ahead. But white has, what, a piece and a rook against the queen? And maybe with e6, trying to open up the dark square bishop, things get messy. Yeah, I could see this being kind of a sloppy affair. So queen h4, on the other hand, wins the queen, and it's real clean because bishop f4 is the immediate threat, and it's just mate. Yeah, white can barely avoid checkmate here. I think they have to play rook g1, maybe bishop c1, but the knight on c2 is also hanging. That's another aspect of the queen coming in, attacking c2. So white's position collapses. Okay, so good session. We improved our rating only modestly. We went up, what, 40 points? I think we started 21-10, so 44 points. But most importantly, we're getting the problems right, and I think my thought process was clear on most of these. And that's what you want to care about most, more so than the rating. Just worry about getting the problems right and being certain of why you got them right. So not walking away from a problem unclear as to what the solution was. So to that end, let me know if you have any questions on these problems. You can post in the comments. And I will continue to climb the tactics training ladder. Hopefully I can get to 2200 pretty soon. All right, guys, thank you for watching, and I will be back again soon with another video. Talk to you later. Bye.